Well, I'm also thankful for our next guest who is here to share her new book. The Fly Girls Revolt is the untold story of female military aviators from the 1970s and 1980s who broke through barriers to fly in combat alongside their male counterparts in 1993. That's how long it took. Author and Everett resident Eileen Bjorkman is with me now. I should say author, resident, colonel, doctor. I mean, my gosh, tell us about your experience in the military.
I came in the Air Force in 1980, and my eyes weren't good enough to go to pilot training, but I found out I could fly in the back seat of airplanes or the back end of airplanes as a flight test engineer.
Nice.
So I went that route instead, and I loved it. I spent 30 years in the military and retired in 2010.
That's amazing. Rising to the rank of colonel.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Congratulations, and thank you for your service. Absolutely, so grateful for that. Talk about the women, though, and the events that you chronicle in this book that got us to 1993, where women were able to fly in combat missions.
So it's actually about a 50-year story. It started back in World War II when women were first brought into the military as other than nurses. And they came into all of the services. Of course, the Air Force didn't exist at that time. So,
right.
And women weren't allowed to be pilots in the military, but there was a group of civilian women who flew military aircraft around the country. They ferried them around, they trained male pilots, they towed targets and things like that. So,
unbelievable.
Yeah, and there was about 1,000 of them. They were called the WASP, and they were disbanded before the war ended. Oh. And then after the war, a small number of women were allowed to remain in the military, but it was very tiny numbers, and they couldn't do much.
Yeah.
And so it was really this 50-year, gradual changing of the rules and letting women do more and more things. And then in the 70s, women started coming in larger numbers.
Yeah.
And then eventually into the Persian Gulf War, which was kind of the impetus for realizing that, hey, women aren't allowed in combat, but they're actually in combat, and that led to changing the laws. So.
You know what's interesting is in pop culture, you see the first Top Gun movie, 1985. Mm-hmm. No women fighter pilots. Now we have the new one. Female fighter pilots. It's amazing. I want you to tell us also about the Mercury 13 group of female pilots that were trained as astronauts, but were not selected because they were women.
Right. That was in the early 60s, and there was it was actually a woman named Jacqueline Cochran who was also instrumental in the WASP back in World War II, and she wanted to bring these women in and show that they were capable of being astronauts. Mm-hmm. But because they were women, and at the time they were only selecting people who had engineering degrees and time flying high-performance aircraft in the military. Well, that automatically excluded women. And so rather than change the rules and say, hey, we have these very qualified women, they just didn't let women, come in.
I have other thoughts, but I'm going to move on to my next question. You think that there are also some unsung heroes of the flight, like Carolyn B. Craft and Janine Holm, right?
Yes, there's quite a few people that most people have probably never heard of that were part of the fight. But Carolyn B. Craft in particular, she was actually an Army officer, and she had to get out when she became pregnant. And there were and she realized there was all kinds of things that women were being discriminated against, and she became a very strong advocate for women in the military. And then Jean Holm was the first woman to become a general in the Air Force, and she was also a very strong advocate. It's really interesting that these women, they didn't benefit at all from this, but they were very strong advocates to make sure that future women had those opportunities.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. How can the military continue to be more inclusive, working on diversity and inclusion? What do they need to be doing now?
I think continuing to cast a wide net like they do now, of just making sure that they're recruiting from all over the country and recruiting people of all backgrounds. I mean, that's what makes us strong as a military, is representing, not just representing the communities, but actually looking like the communities that we defend, and also continuing to have more family-friendly policies that make it not just easier for women to stay in, but make it easier for men to stay in, and that's things like increased maternity leave and paternity leave, child care, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I also understand you recently wrote an op-ed in the Seattle Times. What was that about?
I did, yes. So it was about the lack of women in engineering, and that you could say the same thing about aviation. That the numbers of women in both of those fields remains very low, and a lot of the issues are cultural.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, for sharing your experience and doing the research to bring this incredible book to light. I very much appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. We'll have you again. Thank you.